In the 18th century, Europeans developed a taste for various Chinese goods, including silk, tea, and porcelain. The trade for these goods was largely one way. China was not so interested in European goods. As a result, more and more of Europe's silver bullion found its way into China and stayed there. To correct this trade imbalance, the British East India Company hit upon a Machiavellian solution. It used intermediaries in Turkey and India to smuggle opium into China, where opium dens became commonplace and the effects of opium addiction ravaged the Chinese countryside. By 1838, as many as 12 million addicts populated the opium dens, many idle and unemployed, some selling their family into slavery to afford their habit. When Chinese Special Imperial Commissioner Lin Zexu was dispatched to Canton, now modern-day Guangzhou, to stop the opium trade, the British responded by sending warships and expeditionary forces to wreak havoc on Chinese ports and coastal cities. This, the First Opium War, led to a decisive British victory and the Treaty of Nanjing, which ceded Hong Kong to the British, as well as forcing open 5 major port cities to British trade, including Guangzhou, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai. This began an era that Chinese nationalists later called the Century of Humiliation. The Qing dynasty had itself been humiliated, and unequal treaties like the Treaty of Nanjing undermined traditional Chinese trade restrictions, foreign relations, and even the country's legal system. China had become yet another outpost of the British Empire, still autonomous, but as integral to Britain's trade interests as any of its colonies. With the Communist Revolution of 1949, China once again retreated into its Middle Kingdom status, severing its diplomatic and economic ties to Britain, the United States, and the other Western powers that had long held such power over it. As Professor Michel Chossudovsky of the Center for Research on Globalization explains, however, those ties were to be formed once again, less than 3 decades later.
So 1972 is a landmark date. 1976 is the major landmark date for the transition. Zhou Enlai dies in early 76. He was very much a go-between the two factions within the Communist Party, the left and the right, the capitalist roaders and so on. And then Mao Zedong passes in September. And immediately after the death of Mao Zedong, there is a regime change where the so-called Gang of Four, but they were depicted as the Gang of Four, the 4 major leaders of the within the state apparatus, were in effect displaced and arrested and demonized. And in fact, these were supporters of Mao Zedong. This coup could not have taken place while Mao Zedong was still alive. And the Western media celebrated, pretty much reverberated the position of the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party. And then there was a period of transition with a new leader, Hua Guofen, which lasted approximately, about a year to 2 years. And Deng Xiaoping made his comeback in 77, 78. And in 1978, they established the free trade zones, which was very crucial. And subsequently, of course, in 1979, Deng Xiaoping travels to America and also makes the statement or expresses his anti-Soviet position. And he said, how do we tame the polar bear, so to speak? And then in the early 80s, you had some important landmark decisions. One was, I think, 83 was the new Chinese constitution, which abolishes the People's Commune, which ultimately was still how they managed to inscribe economic policies within the constitution is quite unusual in some regards. And then in the following year, in 84, they extend the special economic zones to much broader areas in what were formerly the treaty ports. of the colonial or the semi-colonial period. Now that is, of course, very important because what they were restoring, and in the same, of course, in the same cities, we're talking about Tianjin, Guangzhou, Shanghai, of course, and what they do is they restore areas where foreign companies can come in and invest. It's much more directed towards broader industrialization, technology. It's not limited simply to assembly line type of operations. But that was, of course, very crucial. Now, I should make a flashback to the 19th century, because in the wake of the Opium Wars, which started in 1839, which, well, without getting into the complexities of this war, there was a treaty, and there were subsequent treaties. The Treaty of Nanjing is 1842, which opens up China to Western merchants and investment and so on, including, and then subsequently railways, public infrastructure and so on, and puts China's trade under the control of the colonizers, in particular Britain, and controlled the customs. Now, that particular structure was used as a model to restore the relationship to foreign capital in the wake of, let's say, in the wake of Mao's death, what we might describe as the post-Mao era. And they use, in fact, the same terms, the open door policy. Now, the open door policy is an American concept, which was part of a treaty. It's the Treaty of Wanxia, which was signed shortly after the Treaty of Nanjing. And so there they reinstate the structures of trade which prevailed prior to 1949.
The ringleaders of this transition are known in China as the Eight Immortals, Communist Party members who rose to prominence after the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, and centering on Deng Xiaoping, who survived a party purge during Mao's reign and took over leadership of the country in 1978. These 8 figures oversaw the opening up of the Chinese economy to Western financial and business interests, including a June 1980 meeting of Rong Yiren, chairman of then newly established state investment firm CITIC, and David Rockefeller in Chase Manhattan's Wall Street headquarters. The meeting, attended by the chief executives of nearly 300 corporations, charted a course for economic and technical cooperation between the economies of China and the US. In the following years, scores of Fortune 500 companies established headquarters in Beijing's new Central Business District, and foreign direct investment in China increased from almost nothing at the time of the transition in the late 1970s to $128 billion last year, making the country now the top destination for foreign direct investment in the world. As a result, the descendants of the Eight Immortals now enjoy immense personal wealth and largely maintain the role of stewards of the Chinese economy. A 2012 Bloomberg special investigation examined 103 descendants and spouses of these immortals, finding that the families have diversified from control of state-run conglomerates into real estate development, private equity, and technology. 26 of those descendants, known as the Princelings, ran important state-owned companies or held top positions in them, with 3 of the most important heading or running companies with access to $1.6 trillion in capital,